There has been a shooting within the past hour at Columbine High School in Jefferson County.
We have already seen that Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, who were responsible for the Columbine massacre, were influenced by both Rammstein and Marilyn Manson. Few people realize that at least one of the victims, Cassie Bernall, almost died even earlier as a result of the influence of Marilyn Manson's music.
As a troubled teen who not only rejected God, but fixated on violence and suicide.
People need to realize that Cassie wasn't just a perfect little Christian girl her whole life, and that
Cassandra Chance was a close friend.
the kids that actually, that killed her, I mean, she was going down that same path.
They discovered that Cassie was doing drugs, sniffing glue. She was fascinated with things satanic.
Symbols that would imply satanic flavor, the pentagrams, the serpents and the daggers, dripping blood.
She would sneak off to concerts they disapproved of.
Was there anything about the music she was listening to that disturbed you?
Yes, they were talking about death, suicide, glamorizing drugs, sex, hate. This music that she was listening to was sending a very negative, destructive message.
But a new book reveals how her parents, deeply devoted Christians, literally rescued their daughter from a life that had inexplicably embraced evil.
Her parents wrote she had felt gripped by a very real power of darkness, and it had taken her months to break free. Part of it was that she had apparently given her soul to Satan. We had sensed all along that there was something truly evil at work in Cassie and her friends. They go on to write about a letter addressed to Cassie with a reminder about a neat spell. And then they give the words of a spell: prick your finger, it is done.
Your finger, it is done. The moon has now eclipsed the sun. Eat your last spread its wings. The time has come for bitter things.
Marilyn Manson was not only successful in conveying his message of Satanism to Cassie and many of her friends, but suicide as well. Cassie's parents wrote, Brad began examining some of Cassie's music and realized that it wasn't just entertainment. The lyrics themselves often carried an unmistakable message. An excerpt from a song by Marilyn Manson, the rock group of choice among Cassie's friends at the time, and a favorite of the two boys at Columbine who killed her, is a case in point. I bash myself to sleep. What you sow, I will reap. I scar myself, you will see. I wish I wasn't me. I throw a little fit. I slit my teenage wrist.
I can see why you were so terrified. Kill me with your parents, then kill yourself? I mean, this language is amazing.
One evening after work, I was trying to reason with her. She just flew off the handle, just started screaming at me, says, I'm just going to kill myself. I could take a knife and I could just put it right through my chest. Would you like to see me do it? I'll do it. And she was just adamant, and I just put my arms around her and I held her close and told her I loved her and that I didn't want to see anything bad happen to her ever.
Cassie was consumed by hate and on the road to self-destruction, later writing,
I hated my parents and God with the deepest, darkest hatred. There are no words that can accurately describe the hate I felt. I often contemplated suicide, and being too frightened to actually kill myself, I compromised. I would take sharp metal files and scratch my flesh until it bled.
Cassie was not only influenced to become a Satanist and commit suicide, but to murder her parents as well. We have already seen Marilyn Manson's warning. The music of Marilyn Manson contains messages to kill your mom and dad.
The depth of Cassie's anger became shockingly apparent one day when Misty went into Cassie's bedroom. She was looking for a teenage Bible, but she came across a stack of letters, unimaginably evil messages written to and from a girlfriend.
And what I discovered was that they not only didn't respect us, they hated us. They hated us so much that they wanted us dead.
Multiple stab wounds in the chest, it says. A pool of her own blood. Gross and a good idea. I can see why you were so terrified. Kill me with your parents, then kill yourself? I mean, this language is amazing.
I thought so. It scared me. It scared me for Cassie. It scared me for Brad and I.
This one must have made you crazy. These are 2 headstones with Mom and Dad Bernall.
Mm-hmm. Murder.
Murder?
Parents' guts on the knife. Yeah, it was obvious that we were truly getting in their way and that they didn't want us around, and it would solve the problems to kill us.
Kill effing parents.
I was actually afraid in my own home, and it wasn't just that night, it was for quite some time after that, just feeling like I needed to watch my back.
She hated us even more.
The more Brad and Misty tried to rein her in, the more Cassie lashed out.
She'd fly off the handle and scream that she hated us, and the minute we turned our backs, she was contacting her friends.
It was a constant battle. Her old friends would call and drive by, once throwing eggs at the house.
Cassie's best friend, a Marilyn Manson fanatic, conspired with Cassie, writing, "God, all I can say is if I had your parents, they would be gone a long time ago. Let's decide how we should kill them." Her suggestion was that they should get a gun. Heaven is absolutely incredible. In fact, the Columbine killers, before they killed Rachel Scott and Cassie Bernall, it seems to us as though God was speaking to them, and maybe many more of those children, about eternity. Because Cassie Bernall had this incredibly strong conviction in her heart that she wanted to go to heaven. So much so that she was talking about how she wanted to go to heaven, that her mother was like, "Wow, don't you want to be here with us?" But I believe it's because God was speaking so much to her. And also Rachel Scott, who was murdered by the Columbine killers. What did Rachel go through? Absolutely incredible. She wrote in her journal that this would be her last year on the earth, and that she knew she was going to be with the Lord prior to her being killed. Not long before she was killed, she wrote that down. Somehow God had spoken that to her. You see, God has a place reserved for us. Jesus said that there's this wonderful place for us called heaven. And I want to look at that right now, and also look at some of the people that are there right now and some of the people that are going there because they've turned against Satan in his musical dark realm, in that dark, evil musical vortex whereby he's seeking to sweep as many as he can to hell, and they've been yanked out by the grace of Jesus Christ. Let's look at heaven.
There has been a shooting within the past hour at Columbine High School in Jefferson County.
As tragic as the Columbine massacre was, God is now using the tragedy to give parents a wake-up call to what is actually happening in youth culture, and in the process bringing thousands of young people to Christ.
We were all on the floor, climbing under tables, over backpacks, and I look over to my right and there's pipe bombs going off. You just hear gunshots and bombs. I believe that there were angels all around us, because those three kids right behind, they were directly behind me. And that's when I committed myself to Christ. It wasn't because I was afraid to die or get shot. It's because it was time.
You pray that your child's not on the injured list, and then pretty soon you start praying, Lord, if she's injured, we'll take care of her. And you almost start praying she's one of the injured instead of one of the missing. I found those hours of waiting to be the most difficult thing. I didn't sleep that night because every time I closed my eyes, I imagined her in the library and what she looked like. And if she was cold, you know, or is somebody taking care of her?
Few people are aware of the fact that before Cassie Bernall was gunned down at Columbine High, she also was bound by satanic forces through music and the darkness of youth culture. Through rock groups like Marilyn Manson, Satan took this once sweet little girl who had once given her life to Jesus and turned her into a bitter and murderous young lady. In fact, Cassie had been brought so far down that she was preparing to kill her own parents.
She told me that she had given her soul to Satan, and because of that, she felt completely alienated from God.
Cassie's close friends recounted how Cassie had actually given her soul to Satan.
People need to realize that Cassie wasn't just a perfect little Christian girl her whole life. The kids that actually, that killed her, she was going down that same path.
understand that it's okay to intervene in your kids' lives and to take a strong stand, that there is hope to bring them out and back and put them on the pathway to being productive adults.
Here we are at the Cassie Bernall Youth Building, which is a place where Cassie used to meet with her church family. It was in this building that I was able to ask Brad Bernall about the steps that he and his wife Misty took to rescue Cassie from pop culture. Cassie was on the same road to destruction as were her killers, but by God's grace and tough love, Brad and Misty were able to snatch her from the fire. Brad, being a father of 3 children and loving them just incredibly, I can't fathom going through what you went through with Cassie and having your daughter, shot in the head, the pain you must have endured. How did the Lord get you through that? How were you able to deal with that? Speak to us about what you went through during that time.
Well, to put it in a nutshell, Joe, April 20th, 1999, 5:30 in the morning was the last time I talked to Cassie. I said goodbye to her as I was leaving work, not knowing that was the last time I was going to see her. By 9:45 that morning, I was feeling ill in my stomach. I was getting sick and decided to go home. So I did. Went home and was lying on the bed, and around 10:30, between 10:30 and 11, started hearing the pops and the booms. The window was open. It was a beautiful day. And I just thought, it's lunchtime. They're out there celebrating. School's almost out. Shortly after that, I received a phone call from a coworker. Said, Brad, did you know that there may have been shots fired at Columbine? I said, no, I didn't. Hung up. Phone rang again. It was Misty. Same story. So I got dressed and went out of the backyard, looked over our 6-foot fence, and by then the whole soccer field at the high school was full of police. And I thought, man, this is serious. I went back inside. I went to the couch and I knelt. And I just prayed to the Lord. I asked him, if people got to be injured, okay, but please don't let anyone die. Don't let anyone die. Well, we only get what we ask if we pray in accordance with the Lord, and this obviously wasn't his plan. But when Cassie never came home that night, we didn't lose our hope yet. She was smart, she was resourceful. We thought she may have been hiding, but ultimately, that happened on a Tuesday, and I believe it was early in the morning on Thursday we received official notice from the coroner that Cassie was one of the victims and had been identified. And I can't tell you the mental anguish and the physical pain that I could feel in my chest. It was just, Joe, it was consuming me. It was just more that I could handle. It felt like my heart was swelling and was going to burst. And a couple days before we buried Cassie, I went out of the backyard to feed our rabbits, and it just overwhelmed me. And I dropped to my knees in the snow, and I lifted my hands. I said, Lord, you've got to take this pain. You've got to take this pain out, and you've got to take the mental anguish, and would you give me a little something back also? And as soon as those words left my mouth, the pain in my chest went away. The awful mental anguish went away, and I was left with the missing part and the questions why. It still was hard, but the unbearable part of that agony was gone. And I really believe that what happened at Columbine on that day was truly a spiritual battle. It was a pinnacle, and Satan was trying to make his stand, and God was gonna reply, and he did. I talked with the mother of a young man who was in the library that day, and he was shot badly, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. And his mother told me that as he lied there on the floor, having been shot once, at least once already, he said that he saw this huge angel coming, and stood in front of him. And the angel looked down and said, don't move, just play dead. Apparently one of the boys came with a gun and stood right in line with he at that angel, stopped, paused, moved on, and never harmed this fellow. again, and he's now undergoing more surgeries and such, and is coming along well, although he's still paralyzed. But I think I can address with some authority more so how it was really a spiritual battle, because I was able to see the videotapes that Eric and Dylan made before they committed their crime. And in that tape, it was very blatant, Joe. They hated Christians. They hated God. That's mostly what they talked about, all the effing little Christians. And one thing that they said that really caught my ear was they said they were going to shoot the Christians in the head.
Right.
And we know that's what they did with Cassie, and that's what they did with a lot of other young people there that day that were Christians.
One of my concerns is that not only was that covered up much by the media, as far as the fact that they were out to get Christians, much of the media ignored that. They said they were out to get jocks, and one jock said, hey, if they're out to get us, why weren't they at the gym? We know that they killed 8 high-profile Christians on campus. Another thing the media seems to have covered rather greatly, for the most part, was the fact that both Klebold and Harris were into bands like KMFDM, Rammstein, Marilyn Manson, listening to music, and we've covered that in our video. They sold their souls for rock and roll. Listening to music that was strongly, Brad, purporting death. And Rammstein's lyrics that they were into from the song Weißes Fleisch, as you're familiar with, the first line is, you in the schoolyard, I'm ready to kill. And boy, did they. In your own life, you had rescued Cassie from the same culture of death as she was into Marilyn Manson, and she was mutilating her body. Explain to us how you rescued her. Explain to us how you found out the effect you saw in her life, and then how you realized there was a line you could draw from her life and the effect that was in her life right to the very music and the subculture of death that she was into. Can you explain to us how you saw that and how you rescued her from that?
Well, the signs are really quite subtle. You know, hindsight is always 20/20, but I can remember looking back before we knew there was a problem on her wrists. We could see where, you know, they were cut, and we'd ask, you know, what happened there, Cassie? And we never got any good explanations. But what we found out was that she was taking a little metal file and scratching until she bled. And that's one of the signs that I think parents can look for. But when we really found out there was a problem was when Misty went into Cassie's room looking for her teen Bible. Misty had sensed a distancing that was growing between those two, and was seeking that Bible to try and find some insights. Well, in going through Cassie's room to find that Bible, she came across this stack of letters that had been passed between her and a friend that talked about how unhappy Cassie was and how she should murder her parents. And the letters had ideas and diagrams of how this could be carried out, and people who could be recruited who might be just effed up enough to be able to do something like this. That opened our eyes to a side of Cassie that we did not know existed, and ultimately we conferred with our pastor, and then had to go to the sheriff. And the sheriff said of those letters that they were the worst he had seen in his over 10 years in the juvenile division. And if either of the girls had been in any prior trouble, they would be before a judge. Wow. At that point, we realized that we had a much bigger problem on our hands that we weren't aware of just the day before. And in order to get Cassie out of trouble, the first step we had to take was to separate Cassie from the group of people that she called her friends, the peers that she wanted to fall in line with. And these were the guys that were experimenting with drugs, they were cutting class, they were drinking alcohol, dabbling in witchcraft, and Satanism. Now let me tell you, Cassie, at a very young age, I'm thinking was 6th grade, got baptized on her own accord. I taught her Sunday school class for 3 or 4 years in a row, and the kids in my class understood the plan of salvation. They knew what it was about. And these kids, on their own, decided it was time for them to get baptized. So Cassie understood. She got baptized, and she wanted to be the person that the Lord wanted her to be. So you can see how strong the peer groups can be to pull a kid that is focused like that off and get them started experimenting in the wrong stuff. And Cassie had experimented. Experimenting is probably too light of a term, because she had actually given her soul to Satan. She had told me.
Wow.
That's how deep she was when she was in trouble. Well, separating her from those kids and also from other influences that we thought were bad. The CDs in particular, the music that she was listening to, we had no idea the influence that had on her. The scratches I talked about where she would cut herself.
Right.
When we would go through some of those CDs and see the innocuous titles on the covers, then open them up, flip through the jacket, read the real titles, read the lyrics. We couldn't believe what we read, Joe. The lyrics were condoning the drug use, the sex, murder, self-mutilation, all of this stuff that Cassie was into.
Right.
It was incredible. And of course we took the CDs that were of that flavor, placed a heavy scratch on them, and in the can they went.
Praise God.
Okay, now we had a very, very unhappy young lady at this point.
Sure.
And that's putting it lightly, because not only did we destroy a lot of her music, but we said you couldn't hang out with these kids anymore. And it was the toughest step we ever took. And we knew that by doing that we took a chance of driving Cassie further away from us. But we were determined to do what we felt was right.
Right.
And when Marilyn Manson says, raise your kids or I'm going to raise them, he means business.
Right.
Because not only he, but the others have such a tremendous influence on these kids. And Cassie was a prime example of that. She was going right down that road.
Right.
We had to stay with Cassie constantly. Misty quit her job, and we tag teamed. We took turns being with her because she became suicidal. When we told her that she was going to be separated from those kids, we saw a side of Cassie that we'd never seen before. She was just totally irate. She would scream at us and tell us how much she hated us. Mm-hmm. It was heartbreaking, because we loved Cassie very much, and we were willing to do anything for her, including risking losing her.
Our hope and prayer is that parents would realize that their children are listening to much of the same music, and it may not have the same effect. They might not even be cutting their wrist, but if it keeps them from Jesus, that's enough to damn their souls. And that's Satan's main objective. He doesn't necessarily have to get them to kill themselves. He could just keep them from worshiping Jesus. And Satan, being a musician, has given them the substitute of his wicked music. And I'm so glad you raised that point. You know, that we're told by Bernall Research Group that mothers spend on average 30 minutes with their children a day, and dads on average 15 minutes. And that's heart-wrenching in our culture. To see the sacrifice that you guys made. I know that Misty quit her job. Can you explain just the sacrifices you realized you had to make to rescue her, to spend more time with her, to be in her life, and to bring her up in Jesus? Because I think that should speak to all parents, that we should be convicted that our children grow up fast. We need to lay our lives down to bring them up in Jesus.
The sacrifice was great. Not only did she have to quit her job, but we had to tell Chris, you know, we love you, but we're going to have to concentrate on Cassie. We're going to have to spend more time with her. She's in trouble, and this is what it's going to take to get her out of trouble. And he was very understanding at a very young age. Like I said, we we stayed with her all the time. But Cassie had lost all trust, all freedom, and all privileges, and she couldn't contact those friends. We went so far to tap our own phone as a litmus test to find out when we could start trusting her.
It was worth her salvation, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, but it was the hardest thing
Yeah.
that we had ever done. She was very unhappy. We would search her backpack. We would go through her room, through her drawers, under her bed, in between the mattresses. And, you know, these were things the sheriff told us that we needed to do. They said, a lot of people don't know this, but your children, they have no right to privacy when they are children and they are living in your house. You have every right in the world to go in and do those kind of things, which is what we did. And
Would that Claybold and Harris's parents were heads up to that, and that would have stopped the whole Columbine situation?
that's true. It could have been prevented, but I think a lot of parents, they see that our kids are seemingly doing okay, but our kids they're very good at living two lives.
Right.
Cassie was. She hid this whole other life from us very well. You can't expect your children to tell you the bad stuff they're doing.
Yeah, right.
You have to figure it out yourself. You have to step out of your comfort zone, and you got to do these things. You've got to do whatever you've got to do
Amen.
to know what is going on in their life, who they're hanging out with, what kind of music they're listening to, and what is influencing their minds.
Right. We're looking at peer pressure, dealing with that, dealing with the death culture that is just wiping out tens of thousands of kids every day. We get calls from parents, and we deal with people who are losing their children to mutilation or suicide attempts and things, and they're so strong into the same music, and it's so important to deal with this. Of course, they need the Word of God, but from what I understand, you switch cultures on her in a sense. You try to separate her from the evil influences. What kind of positive influences, for instance, youth group, or I understand she went on a retreat and she was involved in worshiping God up there and under the stars, just thinking of magnifying his glory. How much of an effect did wholesome biblical things have in her life in not only taking away the evil, but introducing her to things that are wholesome that God wanted in her life? What kind of effect did that have on her, and how did that work?
Well, it was a tremendous effect. With all the things that we had done to implement or to enforce the loss of privilege, trust, and freedoms, that required constant attention from Misty and I to her. We also pulled her out of public school and put her in private Christian school. And we had a very, very difficult time for no less than 8 weeks. At about that time, Cassie had met a young girl, Jamie, who was a classmate, and Jamie belonged to another church and had told Cassie there's a retreat there going on, and that she should go. And she wrote Misty and I a very nice note asking if Cassie could go, because at that time Cassie still couldn't do anything other than school and church and youth group. And we said, well, it's in Estes Park, not sure we're comfortable with that. If she chose to run away, she'd have a 2-hour head start. I don't think we're ready for that yet. Well, she wrote us another note and said it would really be good for Cassie, and we thought, okay. We prayed over this, and we decided that we had to take a step out in faith. So we allowed Cassie to go. We dropped her off at the church, I think on a Friday night, and we picked her up, I believe it was on probably a Saturday evening, possibly Sunday, I don't remember for sure. But what I do remember, Joe, was when Cassie left, we had still a very troubled young lady who was not happy. And when she came back, I saw her come out of a little car. There was 2 school buses in a car. And as Cassie walked toward me, I noticed something was different right away. Her head was up, and I could see there was a smile on her face. And there was a spring in her step, and as she got closer, it seemed to be a sparkle in her eye. And she came before us, and she said, she addressed Misty, she said, Mom, I've changed. I know you don't believe me, but I'm going to prove it to you. And from that day forward, she became compliant to Misty and mine's authority.
Thank God.
When she asked to do things and we said, no, I don't think it's a good idea, I'm sorry, you can't, she'd just say, okay, and then she'd turn around and go her way. Well, at that time, she dug into the youth group at church. She started taking it seriously. And I asked her, Cassie, what happened? What changed you? Because she changed over a weekend. And she says, well, when we were in Estes Park that night, we went out in a car. There was 4 of us, Jamie and I and 2 boys. And we stopped out in the forest, and we got out, and we were just looking at the stars and just marveling over this wonderful universe that God had made for us. They laid their hands on me, and they started praying on me. And she said, Dad, I just felt this like physical weight being lifted off my shoulders.
Thank God.
And
Presence of the enemy.
When that happened, my eyes were open, and I saw where I was headed, why you and Mom were doing what you were doing, and where I needed to go.
We had some good conversations about God, and life, and we parked and got out of the car. And we all just stood there for a minute, just in the moment, looking up at the stars and the mountains and the trees. It was clear we were all just overcome by a huge sense of awe and wonder. What an incredible God this is, and how he's created a beautiful life for us to live. And if he can make the mountains, he can make our lives into something that is really beautiful. It was powerful. She just broke down, and we cried together and prayed together. And it was like after that moment, just her whole countenance changed. Like her face just glowed with hope, with joy and peace. And it was incredible.
That physical weight that she felt leave her, that was the bondage that Satan had on her when she had given her soul to him. She was released. And from that day forward, she was focused on being as Christ-like as she could. She went to church all the time. She got involved in all the youth group activities. Now, I don't want to mislead you or anybody else in that all of a sudden things were rosy and life was easy for Cassie. It wasn't. It was a tough walk for Cassie. Being a Christian is not easy, and but it can be rewarding.
Brad, prayer must have been an integral part of this process of rescuing Cassie, because we know it's only ultimately by the Lord's power. Job talked about how he's a blameless man in his generation, it says, and it says that he sought the Lord every day on behalf of his children and their hearts. And we know it's not simply the outward person, it's the heart. We need to, it's a heart situation. And Jesus constantly dealt with the heart when he dealt with religious hypocrites who didn't really truly seek God from their hearts, were going through the motions. And he prayed that their hearts would not curse God. Did you and Misty pray through this time? I mean, it seems like you had to have been praying. I mean, you prayed through it through the Columbine situation. Speak to us so we might understand the importance of prayer and the role it played in rescuing your daughter from the clutches of Satan, that other parents and people would be desirous of getting involved in being prayer warriors for their children.
Misty and I really depended heavily on prayer. We felt that we were doing and being the kind of parents that the Lord would want us to do, and we were dealing with the situation the way he would want us to. So it was integral for us, but it was also integral for Cassie's development as a new Christian, because you don't pick up a Bible and you don't get involved in Bible studies without having the Holy Spirit, you know, as an interpreter for you to touch you and to feed you with wisdom and understanding. And Cassie knew that, and I know that she prayed herself, but even more importantly, going back after we lost Cassie and going through her room and finding, you know, the notes addressed to her from other girls in the youth group. They were praying for one another. They were supporting one another, encouraging one another. It's not a walk you do by yourself.
Right.
And it's not easy, and I don't want to draw a picture that says that life was rosy for Cassie, because she still struggled. Right. She was just an average kid. She was like anybody else you would meet who was just trying to be a Christian. She had doubts. I know that she didn't know. In one of her notes, she wrote, "What does God have for me to do in his plan?" And she felt like God wasn't talking to her, but she still persevered, and she kept her nose in the Word and was just trying to walk the walk. How was she to know that with one word she was going to touch the whole world and set an example for so many people that you have to believe and you have to keep trying, because we don't always know how God is going to use us in his plan.
Cassie was one of the strongest Christians I've ever known, and the fact that she did that was completely not surprising at all. I knew that she was so willing to die for Christ because that was her love in her life.
She really was learning to surrender it all, you know. It wasn't that Cassie didn't have so many issues that she was dealing with recently, but she truly recently was talking just about how she was learning to surrender stuff. She had dreams of college abroad, but she was saying, you know, I have to yield to God.
It's changed the way you think about things, and it softens your heart.
She always made you feel so good and just made you proud to be one of her friends.
She lived her life each and every day for him.
She was so strong. She was quiet, but her strength just she had so much strength and she loved God so much.
Seemed like she had a glow about her. You could tell that there was something special in her, and you could tell that she was sincere and she knew what she was talking about, and I think because of her, she's made me stronger.
She always, you know, kept strong in what she believed, and I'm thankful that, you know, because I know she's in a good place right now, and I just thank God, you know, that she went out that way, that she went out a martyr, and she went out and dying in for what she believed.
One of our #1 prayers each morning should be God's will through us today. And I honestly believe that that was Cassie's prayer that morning. And that she was praying that she could be an instrument of God's peace, and she's been that in my life.
I always wanted to be like her and, you know, look to Christ every morning and just want to live for him like she did.
The fact that she died for everything she ever believed in is just amazing. And I will never forget what she has done.
She was saying that you can't defeat me. You can't really kill me. You can take my body away, but you can't kill me. I'm gonna live in heaven forever.
I think she, by definition, is a martyr, because a martyr is someone that dies professing their faith and that is killed for their faith. And that's exactly what happened to Cassie.
Is it true that that in her experience, that somehow the Lord did speak to her in a powerful way? It seems as though she had a knowing or understanding that she wouldn't be around too much longer, but she didn't understand the ramifications of that.
She always used to tell me that she will never be married, she'll never have kids. I'd say, oh yeah, Cassie, you will. You will. You'll have kids, and I'll be a grandpa, and you'll be letting your kids stay with me. Is that going to be okay? You know what I'm like. She says, oh yeah, Dad, I'd let my kids stay with you, but I'm not going to get married, and I'm not going to have kids.
They were looking forward to being in heaven with the Lord. And at that time, I sat down next to Cassie, and I said, but Cassie, I wouldn't be able to live without you. She looked at me and she smiled, and she said, but Mom, you know I'd be in a better place. Wouldn't you be happy for me?
Brad, so much about Cassie saying yes. You spoke about how that one word was a witness to so many people. What are ways that she, if you could speak not only to parents, and hopefully parents are hearing this and realizing that our children need to be rescued, speaking to parents and to young people, how is it that she said yes over and over again before she said yes in the end? How is it that she said yes to Jesus and no to Satan, bringing us up to that last moment in her life?
Well, I think when you have your eyes on the goal of eternity in heaven versus eternity in a lake of burning fire,
right?
I think that motivates a lot of people. But mostly, I think Cassie just wanted to be a good person. She wanted to be an encouragement to others. But I think it's important for parents and even young people to know what they're up against. It's not, like I said, it's not easy to be a Christian. We have, the music industry is a huge factor in pulling kids away from Christianity and pulling them towards that lake of fire. I know that in the Columbine situation, at one point, one of the investigators had said to the media, and it was publicized in all the newspapers, that God had nothing to do with this. You know, after the report of Cassie standing up for her faith, when the gunman held the shotgun to her head and asked her if she believed in God, she said yes. He asked her why, and at that point he pulled the trigger and entered her life. People need to know that the media does, they reported that, but they don't really want people to go to Christ. The report was that God had nothing to do with this. Well, I saw the videos that the boys made.
Right.
And they hated the Christians. And I know that the investigators saw that and how they could say this has nothing to do with God, and then how that propagated to the masses is a horrible lie. I mean, because what I saw out of Columbine, I can assure you, was very spiritual and was very God-based. It was all about God and Christians. Right. And here the media is being misled and told that it has nothing to do with God.
Right. And we need to be so aware of it, because so many Christians depend upon the media for information. and we're supposed to be aware of false prophets and false teachers, and sometimes we think the news media is safe, and we can get some truth from the news media, but it's mixed in with a lot of distortion, and we best go to God's Word, best go to the Scripture. Can you please, in closing this, because there's so much in your heart, and I want you to be able to spend time with your wife and your son tonight. Can you close this by encouraging parents? If you could only speak a couple more minutes to parents and you wanted to share what's on your heart, what to do if their child is at risk, their child's involved in this music, showing some of these signs, kind of summing up in a few sentences. You talked about putting your arm around Cassie and trying to love her. It's just showing that love and the concrete things, almost like an ABC thing, and I know it's never that way. It's different with each child, but there's some basic principles.
Yeah.
Could you share some of those in wrapping this up?
We have to make sure that our kids know that we do love them. And when we do things like destroy their CDs and tell them we won't have any more of this in our house, and we go through their rooms and we hold them responsible for things that are corrosive to the morals and to their well-being and to their eternal destination. We have to also tell them why we're doing these things. We don't just do them.
Right.
You know, our job as a parent is to educate our children as well as to care for them during the short time that we have them. We're to bring them up and train them in the ways of the Lord is what our calling is. And that's what we've got to do. It's a training process. And most importantly, we have to make sure that we know, and then our children know, that you've got to be ready to go, to leave this earth at any moment. And you cannot afford to wait, because tomorrow could be your time.
That's right.
Cassie was ready. We know that without a doubt, and I'm confident that when my time comes, I'll see her again. I'll see lots of people in heaven that I'm going to recognize, and it's going to be real, real sad for the folks that have to, go the other way and have to suffer.
Right, Brad, you'd probably agree then that it's imperative that parents, not only as authorities that are responsible and accountable to God, who give an account for the way they raise their children, you would agree that parents also need to live as an example, not telling their child, hey, I want you out of that music, and then listening to the same type of music, but setting the example. And I just praise God that you've been an example to the Christian church, the Christian community, that God's used Columbine in many ways to others on being aware of youth culture and the culture of death and rescuing. And I want to thank you so much for your witness to the Christian community, so much for, we thank God ultimately, but we thank you for being obedient to Him. It's been an encouragement to all of us. And God bless you, brother. We love you so much.
Thanks, Joe.
Praise God for you.
Thanks.
Just 2 days before Cassie was murdered for saying yes to Jesus, she gave the following testimony, stating that she wanted to be a light to the world, and she was.
I think that the way I'm advancing the kingdom is just being a loyal friend and a good example to non-believers and also Christians. Just trying to not contradict myself and get rid of all hypocrisy and just to live for Christ.
Cassie gave me a letter.
Just a few hours before Cassie was actually gunned down, she handed a note to a friend stating the following, quote, "Honestly, I want to give completely for God. It's hard and scary, but totally worth it."
He won't let you go the moment that you say, just come and live with me and take me all the way. 'Cause what he said is true, he will never leave you, he's forever by your side. I know it's true.
As I turned to kiss her face goodbye, she smiled and said, "I love you, Daddy, I'll be home by 5.
As she raced away, I waved and brushed a tear from my eye. In that moment, my mind relived the times when she was young. And standing at her door, I hear every lullaby she sung. And suddenly I realized that her life had just begun. In that moment, in that moment, in that moment, I knew what love was all about. In that moment, my heart stood still. At this moment, before I let you go, one last thing, your daddy loves you so. Things can change so quickly, like a flower she was gone. Yet time it ticks so slowly, and I'm left here to be strong. She was chosen for his purpose, as she did his will, not mine. Her life a testimony as she lay there and as the host of heaven welcomes you home, who say, well done, my child, I love you so. You hear me say, the Father loves you so.